I was fast becoming a businessman. I asked my dad, but it was sometime in my high school years. I said, Dad, as an engineer, how much money do you make? He told me, and I said, Dad, I think I made that much this year. He said, man, we're going to get you signed up with the IRS, son, before you get in trouble.
From Escape Collective, this is Overnight Success, the podcast about the entrepreneurs, the personalities, and the passionate people who make up the sport of cycling and the stories behind the icons they've built. Tom Ritchey. Not only is Tom one of the founding fathers of mountain biking, he's also a master frame builder, component maker, innovator, entrepreneur, and from reputation and personal experience, an all-round wonderful human being. Researching this episode and trying to put a timeline together to extract the major milestones that Tom has been through was a daunting task, to say the least, because there's just so much there. He's been in business for basically 50 years, and as modest of a business that he's intentionally kept it always hasn't been a straightforward journey without its hurdles. So much of Tom's story has already been documented, and I just didn't want to tell that again. In fact, I just know I can't do justice to telling Tom's intertwined life and business journey in a reasonable length of podcast. But as it turned out, what came out of Tom during our interview ended up being so much better than just that. At this point in Tom's life, I found him to be incredibly reflective on his experiences with benefit of years of hindsight and perspective. As a brief introduction, Tom was born in 1956 and is now 66 years old. He's definitely a young 66, so to speak, and he still rides his bike over 10,000 miles a year. He began cycling at around the age of 11 when he got his first so-called real bike and quickly progressed to racing in 1970. That's when he also learned to repair bikes, learned to weld, and shortly after, he built his first bike frame for $21, which came from the simple necessity of getting something affordable, lighter, and faster. By 1976, Tom got the reputation and nickname of the Senior Slayer, and raced the World Junior Championships with the US national team. To put it mildly, he was damn good. But bike racing didn't seem to be what drove Tom. There was much more to him than that, and much of that he attributes to his father, who, by the way, was celebrating his 90th birthday as we recorded this episode.
My dad was on the GI Bill on the East Coast and found himself, because of his skills and his unique assignments in the Air Force, that he found himself the head of a skunk work program from RCA. And at a young age, he was doing things that were on the leading edge of recording disc technology. He had, I think, 5 or 6 patents before he was 30 years old. Television studios, in the 50s, there were these monster cameras. I don't know, they looked like something out of Star Wars. They were so huge. And he was working for RCA, the company that owned that technology. He came to the attention of Ampex, which was a competitor of Hewlett Packard in the San Francisco Bay Area, in a town called Redwood City, which is sandwiched between where I am right now and Palo Alto. They wanted him and they recruited him. And he left his life that he had lived for the most part all his life on the East Coast and took us west, and we landed in Palo Alto. Anyway, it was a very international community. He says, he was working with people from India, people from Japan, engineers from all over the world. That was a very normal thing in the valley at that time. It was already becoming somewhat of a feeding grounds for new ideas and people that were assembling from around the world with opportunities. And he did the same thing.
This is where Tom's father crossed paths with someone who proved to be very influential and a good friend to him, Jost Brandt. Jost, spelt Jobst, is described as a brilliant German engineer who worked for Hewlett Packard and also had a reputation for being an absolute beast on the bike.
But they hit it off on a bike ride, and I was probably 14 years old at the time. My dad came home all muddy, big grin on his face, and he couldn't, he just couldn't wipe it off. And I just said, what did you do? He'd never come back that caked in mud on any bike ride. And he just went on and on and on about what they did and how much fun they had. And he couldn't believe it and blah, blah, blah. So Yopes opened his eyes to basically being able to ride anywhere. And it was the beginning for me. I wanted to figure out what that was all about. And so I was just starting to crack open the door that was my dad's world. He got me into cycling in a big way, and I got him into racing. And he wasn't interested in the competitive side, but he ended up doing racing together and then engineering kind of bike solutions together. And he helped me repair my first frame that I bought for $50 so that I could afford a good bike. It was a Cinelli that was broken, and that was the first good bike that I had.
Here's Tom describing what the landscape of the bike industry was like back in the 70s when he was first starting out.
The thing about a racer or a person that was an enthusiast like my dad, there was really hardly any new bikes that existed. Everything was a used bike, and you could find new components, but for the most part, there was very few people buying new bikes.
Was European bike racing just such a far off thing that was another world away? Were you aware that there was a pretty organized professional sport on the other side of the pond at that time?
Yes, there was an awareness, but again, there wasn't a way to put together the pieces of what that looked like. As a 15-year-old repairing this frame, there wasn't any information as far as pictures, videos, books. I think in places like New Zealand and maybe Australia, because of your strong connections to England, you probably had English people that knew the bike industry. And in England and Europe, particularly in Italy, of course, there was what you would call a bike industry, a pro bike industry and pro racing. And so you probably had more of an advantage to figure out certain things than I had in the United States. I talked with my distributor in New Zealand, and he goes on about people that were doing things and building frames in New Zealand. And I'm pretty certain that there was more going on in New Zealand as far as frame building than there was in the United States. Wow. Anyway, to find someone that would teach you anything, it didn't exist. There was one builder, a guy named Albert Eisentraut in Oakland, that was just starting to get a business that I would say that was getting respect. But for the most part, the idea of a young person like myself, a 15-year-old, doing something that would be foreseen or expected to be successful was incredibly audacious of me. I remember people highly suspicious of anything that a 15-year-old could do. And I did a lot of things that were very suspicious. And a lot of it was because my dad was an engineer. He was a rule breaker. The idea of inventing things or creating things that had never been done before and changing the apple cart in terms of an industry wasn't a big deal to him. It was like, well, we'll just figure this out and do it.
Did that just kind of rub off on you by seeing him, or was it something that he explicitly tried to impart on his children? Or
my dad didn't know any other way than what came to him. It's a great thing for me to kind of try to get right as far as me talking about my father, because the most unique thing I'd say at the time was my age, but it wasn't that unique in terms of the community that I was living in and connecting with. You're surrounded by people like this. I mean, Jack O'Neill, Steve Wozniak, and Steve Jobs and Nolan Bushnell, where people were inventing things. And I lived in the town that Hewlett Packard started in a garage. It just wasn't out of the normal. And it felt normal to just think it, do it, experiment, and be not so full of yourself that you were taking selfies and any of the things that we kind of associate with somebody nowadays making a business or trying to start a business. Because for me, I wasn't at all aiming at making a business. I mean, I was just happy to get a bike I could use because I was trying to race and be competitive. I was inventing things that I thought would work to make my bike lighter. And I think that the common denominator then that's still the same as it is now is lightweight, high performance, go fast. And the adventures that we had off-road were epic because we weren't just throwing bikes in the back of a pickup truck and bombing down a road in Marin. We were taking 100 to 150 mile rides in which the day was shot, you were shot, there was nothing left. You're basically whacked because you just put in 10,000 feet of climbing and rode 30 miles on dirt. When you did that and you kind of did that in a compressed amount of time, you develop skills that most people didn't have. And so the idea of using these mega rides as training rides, as fun rides, it was just very untraditional. It was drinking from a fire hose in a training sense, in a product development sense. I was basically being mentored at the same time as I was building my own products, because it wasn't just the frames I was building at that time. I was making stems, saddle seat post combinations, and bottom brackets, all in an attempt to save weight. And ultimately, the racing kind of gave me a platform to showcase some of the components that I was starting to develop. At 17 years old, I bought lathes and I bought milling machines, very, very, very nice, high quality machinery that I was beginning to not just make tooling and things that could help me make a frame better, but also make components. And this was all, way before the mountain bike. It was all in the era of racing, road racing, and building up a business that at the time, leading up to my graduation from high school, I was fast becoming a businessman that I forget when I asked my dad, but it was sometime in my high school years. I said, Dad, I didn't even know how much money he made. I just said, Dad, as an engineer, how much money do you make? He told me, and I said, Dad, I think I made that much this year.
As a high school student?
As a high school student, yeah. Yeah. He said, man, we're going to get you signed up with the IRS, son, before you get in trouble. I think that the main thing is that I was given a kind of a double opportunity. I was leading this racing career life. I was leading this business career life. And then I was under the shadow of very, very skilled engineers, mechanical engineers of physicists. Some of my favorite classes in high school were taught by a guy that was a physicist. And I took college education courses in high school because I was trying to learn as much as I could. And yet I didn't have enough time in the day. So, the other thing about being a racer back then is that you didn't have enough time to do it all.
And what was your decision process like, whether to continue with maybe education or maybe frame building or maybe and a business and maybe racing? What was there a fork in the road for you, or did it come about quite naturally which way you were going to go?
Well, that was the big decision. My mom and dad, of course, were thinking that I'd be wasting my life playing with bicycles. Again, there was no bike industry. There was no career path. It really came down to living the way I wanted to live.
Tom made the decision to stop competitive road racing, which let him focus on frame building and running his own business. But that never curbed his desire to keep riding and challenging the status quo. This is perhaps the genesis of where mountain biking first began.
I mean, it wasn't that many years. It was 2 or 3 years when the mountain bike happened after I stopped racing, it was a whole new ball game, and it was a whole new race kind of experience. And I had a lot of people that I had known that I'd been on, that were on the national team with me. I was building bikes for them, and they wanted to just have fun on a mountain bike too. And so it just became a natural kind of evolution of racing, transitioning from something I was really familiar with to a different kind of racing on the mountain bike side. And so I started racing in the 80s, in the early 80s, 79, 80. And I was the only non-Marin guy that raced repack, because repack was basically a handful, less than a dozen people that were just high school friends and buddies.
You're not talking sanctioned racing. This is just more than two people trying to beat each other.
Yeah, it was just this, kind of fun scene that people kind of hear about the story of repack. They don't realize that how closed in it was, how tightly knit this little group of Marinites were doing what they were doing. The mountain bike got people's fantasy and attention because it was really something you could race. Something you go cross country with. It was an extension of off-road riding like I knew it, like with yokes. You could be gone all day. It was a different customer. There was no other group of people that I was aware of in California in my racing kind of circles, and the people that I knew that were doing what Yopes was doing until the mountain bike.
He was quite a big influence on you by the sounds of it, Yopes.
Well, he was an influence on a lot of people. His personality was about 6'4" in every dimension. He was German. So his voice was low, and he talked like a very, very strong. You gotta, tough it out, you little punk, and just be. Anyway, there was a lot of this, strong, be strong. Everything. You got to build it like a battleship. You can't let anything break, Richie. If you make it through this ride and you don't break something, I will eat my shorts or something, So I'd show up on my, my custom lightweight stuff, and he would just give me hell. And it took a couple of years of me not crashing and burning and being on his rides and surviving them before he thought of me in a respectful way. It took a while.
Did you feel like you had something to prove to him? Was he a bit of that? You looked up to him and I guess aspired to him and make him proud of you? Was that the relationship, or was it not that?
There was a huge amount of respect. He deserved it, and in that sense, I wanted to be respectful to him. But he wasn't my father, and he wasn't somebody that I was in business with. He wasn't any. I would say that I wanted to take his information, his warnings, his insights, his information. And because he was breaking everything, he broke eight Campanello axles and 5 campy arms of a crank and things like this. And he hung them up to kind of showcase his prowess. And everyone, was looking at him as far as the hammer in that era, in that time period. And I think I was the only person that ever built him a bike that didn't break. I didn't have to prove anything to him. I already did. And I think we had a very good respect for one another at that point. I'm pretty sure we did. Unfortunately, he passed and, didn't have that conversation.
Yeah. I've heard you speak about him a lot in very high regard. And
yeah.
He
not only, he influenced a Bay Area cycling culture in a way that he deserves to have his story told, because he not just influenced me and what happened in terms of the direction that I felt capable and motivated, grounded, and given the benefit of some very, very good engineering information to make good decisions on the bikes that I was trying to build. But he did it for other people. There was a number of companies in the local area that I would say had his mark on them. I mean, of course, Specialized was 50 miles south, and it was a little on the. I mean, of course, Mike Sinyard knew who I was and knew who Yopes was, and there was an awareness factor. I mean, the Bay Area ended up really having quite a large cycling company output by the time of the mountain bike. When you think about it,
Yeah.
Bridgestone, Bianchi, Specialized, Marin, Fisher, Breeze. There was, and not to mention Ibis and Santa Cruz and all these. I mean, the area was very, very prolific and inspiring to a lot of people to develop the next level of cycling products and experiences. And the idea of aerodynamics and all that came from an aerospace industry that had wind tunnels and all kinds of things. So, I mean, I stand on the shoulder of a lot of great people when I think of ideas and who was first and how we were all kind of building something that was bigger than us. And cycling was a love. I mean, it wasn't a business. We were passionate communally about what we were doing.
At the beginning of the 80s and late 70s, when you guys were experimenting with this new form of cycling at the time, was it an intellectual and a craft challenge for you now when you went out for a ride to see, like, how can I make this better? How can I fix this? How can we evolve this? Was that what your riding was about to you then? Or is it simply just riding a bike and then coming home and thinking about that other stuff later? Or was it all intertwined?
Well, when I'm asked that question, I basically answer it in a pretty blunt way. I was a very selfish business owner because I was trying to beat the skills that were much better than me and younger than me. And the only way that I could keep up with people I used to race with and that were younger upstarts that were coming on was to have some better technology. And so it really was a matter of being able to hang with, the best racers in the world and ride with them that spurred a lot of what I was trying to produce. It was for me first.
Is that right?
I was passionate about riding at a high level. I was passionate about being able to stay with the best riders in the world. Here's a little tidbit of information. Basically, when I retired in '76, there was only amateurs. There was no professional cycling. It really only happened as a result of Greg LeMond that professional cycling came to the United States. He brought it here. He went through his young career so fast and so furiously and so dominant that when he hit Europe, they didn't know what hit him. The mountain bike happened almost simultaneously to Greg. And it was like this 1-2 punch that took the industry from Greg and his dominance in racing and the mountain bike and its attraction to a new mass of people that was looking for something different and something, almost, surreal in terms of you can ride off-road up a mountain and on these dirt gravel roads or these trails. And it ended up creating a new way of solving problems and gave confidence to a lot of people like Tommy Ritchey and other small companies at that time that they had something to offer. Greg, he built into his contract, little whippersnapper, things that had never been built into a contract. It's like you go to Europe and you just ride what the gods want you to ride. You don't have a choice.
Yeah.
Greg came along and he said, no, I'm going to do it my way. And they accepted it. And basically, I was in the same kind of unique position on the mountain bike side where no one had done this before. No one had done what I was doing. No one had built a frame without lugs. You don't do that. You need lugs. If you don't have lugs, the world's going to fall apart. It's how can you possibly be so audacious to think that your bikes are strong enough without lugs? It was just this mindset that, I was just at the right time at the right place and just ready to drop the hammer of the stuff that I had already experienced and already proven to myself that I knew what I was doing, and whether it be racing or the size of my business at that time and my capacity as a young company to build hundreds of these high-end mountain bikes and feed the appetite of something that was unknown. So no one talks about Greg and his influence. He was a Napoleon in character, and we ended up kind of just becoming somewhat of a side story to his success. That what are we doing? We're reinventing the bicycle. Is basically how people thought. It's like, what kind of nutcases in the United States think that they can do this? Oh, well, Greg just won the Tour de France. Okay, yeah, well, okay, I guess we have to take that into account.
Was there ever a Tom Ritchey who did have a chip on his shoulder, who had something to prove to the world, or, in hindsight, or is you kind of, has that never been part of your agenda?
Yes, I would say that I'm definitely not trying to be a holier than thou in the way that I'm trying to speak for other people that were in business. I would say that I've had to shrug off my share of tough experiences. I think in the stories that I've told, I experienced some betrayal and all kinds of things that have to do with trying to develop into not just a surviving company, but also a company that benefits from the uniqueness of the noble bicycle and aspire to do that for I've lost friends. I mean, I think the last couple of years with COVID and the last 5 years, I've lost a number of people that I consider to be wonderful people in the bike industry. There's a lot of mentors that like Yopes and inspiring people in my life contributed to things going so well for me. And I would say I just owe more. I'd say since my relationship with the marvelous Martha and just the unique, loving person that she is, I would like to think that I've softened. There was probably times where I was battling an ego issue. Yeah. I've not just had my friends have lives that are shorter than me, but I've also survived 2 very, very close near-death experiences on the bike.
Oh, really?
I would say that ever an awareness that I'm here and I need to make good use of my time and not be, just in it for myself. That's hopefully the way that I will carry myself and be toward other people and look for a gracious connection with people that I've hurt. I was a very, very overly confident, gifted young man that got a lot done and probably did some trampling on other people in the process. There's a lot of people that I've got in my life that I don't deserve. I just leave it at that.
In 1979, Tom entered a business collaboration with Gary Fisher and Charlie Kelly, which they called mountain bikes. Until then, these style of bikes were called clunkers. This would be the first place people could buy fully complete bikes like this. That's not to be confused with Specialized, who, in 1981, sold the first production mountain bikes that could be bought in a bike shop and rolled away that same day. Anyway, with mountain bikes, Tom did all the R&D and manufacturing, and Gary and Charlie did the sales. Unfortunately, that partnership didn't go as planned, and mountain biking was dissolved not entirely amicably in 1983 when Kelly sold his share and the company eventually became Fisher Mountain Bikes.
If you read the accounts and you read the story the way that I read it, it's very easy to hear that confusion about going out of business because for some reason, that was something that Gary said to everybody. I was busy raising a family and building a lot of bikes, and he was the mouthpiece, and he was the one, selling all the bikes across the United States and the world at that time. And so it was very confusing to a lot of people. But the reality is that I was never interested in a partnership with them. I wasn't a partner with them. I was always my own company from 1973 on. The informal way that I became connected with Gary and Charlie was they didn't have any money, and I realized that the only way I was going to make this happen was to finance them. And so every Ritchey they sold, and they only sold Ritchie. So there's, some confusion about that. They kept racking up a certain amount of debt. And I was a new father. I was newly married. I was building this house on Skyline. I was trying to live my dream, and I was basically not getting paid. The final thing is that I had to live, and Gary felt somehow, and Charlie, that they were up against a wall because they didn't have a way of paying me. And some actions happened that were just, they weren't something that I could have foreseen. And I found myself being told I was out of business.
What was the state of the business at that point when you guys severed?
I was 90% dependent upon, because I was still building some bikes on the racing side and stuff. So, but I was 90% dependent upon them, and they decided they weren't going to pay me anymore.
Right. That was, I imagine, devastating.
So it wasn't that my company was out of business. They just decided they were going to stop paying me.
Yeah.
And so, within a very short amount of time. So what people don't realize is that Charlie Kelly was Gary's 50-50 partner, and Charlie didn't like what was going on, and Charlie split. He said, Gary, I'm not going to have any part of this, and I'm just going to say goodbye, and all I want is my computer, and you don't owe me anything. And the next thing Charlie does is call me up and said, I don't like how this happened, and I know you're out a lot of money, and I don't know what to say, but I know a guy that might need some help, and he can do things for you that could probably be really helpful. And that guy was Mike Neal. Mike Neal was in 1979 or 80, along with Boyer, the only other American in the peloton. Anyway, Mike was a previous teammate of mine. I was familiar with Mike. I wasn't a really good friend of him, but I knew that he had some difficulties, and I knew that he was really good in sales. And so he introduced me to Mike after losing track with him for a couple of years. And Mike was willing to basically move to California and be my sales manager. And in a very short amount of time, I bought Mike a brand new Saab 900, and I said, here are these bikes, go put 10,000 miles on this car, drive all over the United States, establish my now new distribution company that is from this point forward. And he ended up doing everything I asked him to, and then left 1 year later. Akowitz hired him to be the coach of 7-Eleven. Basically, everyone in the industry, everyone in the country knew who Mike Neal was at that time. And so he was very well known, and he needed a job. I needed a person like him to help me out. And it was in a very short order, I got myself back on track, and it was almost like, nothing had happened.
And from what I read, that many of those frames went to Rocky Mountain. Is that accurate?
That's right. Before Mike came on, Rocky had this kind of loose relationship with me, saying whatever I can build, they will take. I just ran across their catalog, and the crazy thing is, I had forgotten that it was called Rocky Mountain Ritchey at that time. When I said yes, and I turned on the faucet, they got so excited, and they just put me in the front half of their catalog, promoted the heck out of Ritchey. And so they took care of a Canadian, basically an output and being paid issue immediately. So I instantly got some finances that I could work with and build from. And then the United States with Mike developed very quickly at the same time. And then, it was just a moonshot from then on.
This podcast is fully funded by our members at Escape Collective. In fact, all of our content on our website and our podcast network is 100% supported by our members who believe that cycling media should be independent from the sport and industry we cover, and that we should exist to serve you rather than live or die by our ability to be a platform for the sole purpose of selling you more stuff. If you enjoy this podcast or any of our other work and believe in our mission of independence, please go to escapecollective.com/join and become a member today. Thank you for your support. Around this time, what was your philosophy on what you did business-wise, what products you built, what you didn't build? Did you think too much about it? This story sounds so much by the seat of your pants, one decision after another. Was it that? Was there some guiding principles that you really had in mind to make all your decisions?
It was all the above. From my own selfish motivation of wanting to always have the faster bike than somebody that was half my age, and being able to be, to keep up, to things that Yopes had said to me that I, basically giving me a browbeating for doing things that would leave a customer possibly with a problem product, with an inferior product, and those things got out of my system very, very early in my career, so that a lot of my learning curve was on myself, and was at a period of time where really I didn't have a global business. It was a relationship with a customer that was very, very close. And it was called Ritchey Custom Cycles because basically every bike I built was a relationship with a customer, practically. And so I would fit them. I would decide what the right specs were for them. I would select tubing based on how heavy they were, what they were looking for in terms of performance. Anyway, the idea of the one-off was something that I needed to change in order to grow the company.
Yeah.
Back to your question, the philosophy, the idea that I was getting visited on a regular basis by the Japanese trying to pick my brain what I should help them develop, that I would buy from them, was getting irritating to me. I was aware that I was giving my ideas away, and that no one had really figured out how to flip the tables. And in the same way Greg LeMond kind of flipped the tables on the racing side, I was the first to come along and say, no, I'm not going to give my ideas anymore. I'm going to develop with companies product that's unique and specific to the way that I look at designing. My designs are 100% Ritchey. And I basically chose a path of a component maker. The bull moose handlebars, of course, was my first component that I had made. And that was made possible because Mike Sinyard basically came to me, and for his first stump jumpers, he said, "Hey, Richie, I'll pay you 50 cents or $1 or whatever it was for every one of those bars you make, and you'll be wealthy. You'll be." So that was like the beginning of a relationship with a Japanese company called Nitto.
Okay.
And a trip to Japan. Since Mr. Shimano had bought a mountain bike, he wanted to meet me, and Mr. Suntour Junzo Kawai bought a mountain bike. He wanted to meet me, and I ended up, just kind of being somewhat welcomed with somewhat of a red carpet to a lot of the Japanese companies. The Japanese were really good at going quickly on product development. And it just became a very fast process of offering in a very short amount of time from a company that was selling mainly bikes to a company that was selling millions of components all over the world, all over the global industry of bicycling. And at that time, the United States had turned on the faucet, and it was now the leader in terms of a category and racing, and now 7-Eleven team and Greg LeMond. And, the racing world was looking at the United States, and now mountain bike racing was in its infancy. It was on, kind of a world tour stage, and in another couple of years, Ritchey was a leading team. I was uniquely positioned to have people that wanted not just my components, but the unique bike products that I was making, and for them to race for me. And so I had almost a zero cost team until 89. I was racing, and we were proving out designs and developing in so many different ways. You had the growth of the small builder industry in the United States. I was supplying components to the small builders, which was unheard of. They were my competitors just a year before, and they were buying Ritchey tubing and product and wanting me to help them in their businesses. And I was becoming this dynamic, somewhat, hybrid of any other business type that had ever happened in the bike industry. And I was inspiring not just builders, but it was many other, whether it be Bontrager, WTB, all these companies, saw what I was doing, and they said, that's something I want to do.
During his time working with the Japanese, Tom established a fruitful and symbiotic relationship with Shimano, who both had a deep mutual respect for each other.
So basically, what people probably have a hard time believing is Suntour was a bigger player than Shimano at that time. Suntour was kind of a darling of the mountain bike industry. Shimano was was a stronger infrastructure company, and I was much more impressed by what I saw as a final product in the design sense, in a thoroughbred design, breaking down the benefits and the costs and the weight and all the things than any other company in the world at that point in time. And I told Shimano that. I said, I want to figure out how to coexist with you because you're doing everything right. At that point, I'd helped them with the whole Dior group development. And there were things that they were doing that I argued with them. The whole BioPace thing, I basically said, I'm not a customer of yours for this. I will develop my own crank. And they respected me for that. But everything else, I looked at and broke it down and relied upon it in my own personal bike, and realized whether it be the shifting side, the rear cassette, the derailleur, the mechanisms, the way that they were attacking the index side of things, they had a lot more insight than anyone, whether it be Campy, Suntour, whoever it was in the world that was making. And Mavic was, there was a lot of other very small niche players in the world that were trying to, look at the opportunities that were presenting. And there was a lot of people that, were thinking it was the mountain bike was their oyster. They could cash in on this opportunity, and there were some American companies too that were going after it. My policy with Shimano was, you do what you're doing, I'm going to do everything else. That was my policy. Shimano wasn't making tires. Shimano wasn't making rims. Shimano wasn't making spokes. Shimano wasn't making, pedals. Well, they were, but they weren't making a mountain bike pedal at that time. They weren't making tubing. They weren't making forks. Stems, handlebars, seat posts, saddles. And I went after with everything I could and could imagine a non-Shimano brand that wasn't infringing on their core business, because I needed their core business to succeed. The world needed their core business to succeed. The mountain bike was going to be a joke without Shimano.
Right.
People don't realize how stupid some of the designs that were coming out at that time that were killing the popularity of the mountain bike. I'm not going to impugn names, but I saw it firsthand, and there were a lot of really stupid components that were coming out, and I needed a partner to rely upon.
A pretty profound insight for still a young businessman who's still trying to work out their market, and it did well for you.
It was so obvious to me, and I was relying upon their components to race on, and to not leave me stranded out in the wilderness. And I was seeing, so to me, I took my adventures seriously, and I could always rely upon a Shimano product. And to me, to even be in the league where a company would spec a Shimano drivetrain and for the most part, what was in the Shimano XT level and Dior level and Dura-Ace level, and use Ritchey components to complement that bike. It was a beautiful thing.
Tom began as a master frame builder and made the monumental transition and complex task to a much larger global business. Tom humbly understates this transition to go from a small, personalized frame builder who handheld customers to a manufacturing business that could grow at scale. We're talking outsourcing manufacturing, distribution, managing inventory, capital to sustain cash flow, and so much more that this type of endeavor takes, but Tom did it.
I am so fortunate to have to have survived myself, to be honest with you. One of the really important life lessons and core philosophies, aside from design, and design is a whole nother conversation, because the philosophy of design is very holistic to me. I know from words that Joop spoke to me and from things that I discovered that the evolution of design, the beginning point of the bike, how it started in the 1880s with pneumatic tires and other things, and ended up where it was today in my skill set, is something that got proven to me in practice, got proven to me in my own personal evolution as somebody that tried to make something, and I had to admit failure and understand it after that, and understand it in a new at a young age. Having Joop Brandt hammer into me ride after ride after ride, don't take for granted the 100 years of people working on this thing. Don't ever think that you've got an idea just like off the top of your head that is going to surpass that learning. You have to work hard for it. You have to do all the things right. And if you're lucky, you might chip away at that technology. You just might. but for the most part, don't expect success without a lot of failure. That has always rang in the back of my head like a bell every time I think of something new to do. And people ask me for years and years and years. I said, well, what are you working on now? What's your next design? What are you trying to do? And a lot of times I tell them, well, a lot of stuff is 40 years old. I've been trying to figure this puzzle out of this design issue, and I'm waiting for the right time. I'm waiting for the right material to show up. Imagine this. In the 90s, you couldn't even give away steel tubing. I trashed steel tubing. I destroyed and recycled the best Ritchey tubing by the truckloads. I couldn't give the stuff away. The industry does crazy things. It decides it's going to go all out for aluminum.
Mm.
And there's no one that wants to buy a steel bike anymore. It's crazy. I thought, this doesn't make sense, but it's the industry. You have to wait in a timing sense for people to get their heads screwed on straight and want to sometimes buy the right thing, because we've lived through fads and fashions and all these things. So not only do you have to have the right idea, but you have to have an instinct in what the public is being wagged and how the public is being influenced and what the public wants. And right now, I could go into stuff that I just, look at and I roll my eyes, and people know I roll my eyes about, but I'm not going to waste any real big time on it, because it is what it is. I'm a small fish in a big sea of very big megaphone type companies, and they're going to do what they're going to do. And there's going to be a period of time that they're going to have fun doing it. And there's going to be a period of fun where there's going to be, they're going to fall out of favor. And that's just been the way that's the perspective of a 50-year-old company. The other thing is that I, in my younger years, prioritized certain things that didn't have to do with being a big company, because I like my life the way it is, being able to live with the less stress rather than additional stress. I like being able to go on a tandem ride every day with my Martha. I like being able to basically make new plans every day. That's not just me now. That's me 50 years ago. I've always been that way. And people will tell you that's the reason why I left racing. Racing became a job. And I didn't like jobs. I liked riding my bike, making things that made me happy and make my bike experience better. And then people came along and said, wow, can you do that for me too? And I said, okay. And then I just rode that wave until it worked out. And then people didn't come along for a period of time. And here I am. I'm just in this, I'm still living in this log house on this hill with hundreds of miles of trails and dirt roads in my backyard. And I've got great people working with me, for me, that have figured out some of the minutiae and the difficult to figure out things that have to do with running a company. And they've all just decided that I am the way that I am, and they're going to have to do things the way that they're going to have to do things if they're going to have a job. and there's enough of them. There's a critical mass of them that make it work.
Tom is obviously a gifted craftsperson and entrepreneur, but he also seems to have this natural throttle in his thinking, with wanting to preserve his quality of life, his brand, and ultimately his destiny. His modest ambitions have kept all of those things intact. Here's Tom's philosophy on that.
When I went down that list of design philosophies, I missed one. And that was, don't borrow money. Grow only as much as you can afford. So Ritchey is not only a surviving company, but it's also a company that has no debt, has no beholdens, And to me, that's a peace of mind. that's something that makes it possible for me to just, make things stable and satisfying for a company of people that don't have to worry about, someone else coming along and saying, hey, where's your keys to your door? I guess it goes back to just being somewhat old fashioned and having a dad that said to me as a young man, he said, Johnny, the borrower is the slave of the lender. And that just stuck, just like, oh yeah, I don't want to be a slave. That's not something that I like the idea of. I want to be free. And so I think the number one kind of foundation of Ritchey is that, is the bike is the freedom tool. Why are we in an industry that we're all slaves in a business sense? No, that's not me. My bike is my office.
As you'll have heard, Tom's story intersects with so many others from the early era of mountain biking. One thing unique to Tom, however, is that he is perhaps the only one who still owns his own name on his brand. Gary Fisher, Joe Breeze, Keith Bontrager, and many others have all sold the rights to their name, for better or for worse.
Going along with, having an early experience with somebody that was somewhat of a partner in a pseudo sense and being, dependent upon them. And there was things that I couldn't have any control over it in a very early part of my decision-making process, how I was going to survive or not survive. I just made a decision that, it was better to be small and not have a partner. And it's not the lesson that you learn once. Sometimes you have to learn it twice, and I'd learn it twice. But I'm probably, in a unique sense, not in a surviving myself way. I was allowed to make that mistake once, and in a big way, again, with Specialized.
What Tom is talking about with that reference to Specialized is that he nearly lost the business again, this time in 1995. Tom didn't get into this story during our conversation because, well, it's complicated. But from the way I understand it, Tom wanted to retain his lifestyle of riding. He was a husband and a father of 3 kids. In this partnership, Mike Sinyard, the founder and CEO of Specialized, would let Ritchey write his own rules, which meant remaining autonomous while gaining Specialized support for operations. Ritchey Parts would go on to Specialized Bikes, meaning it would be a steady source of business, and it seemed to be exactly what Tom wanted. Ritchey merged his company with Specialized, completing the deal in October 1995. But in less than a year, the bike market experienced a major downturn, one that hit Specialized especially hard, with them nearly going bankrupt. Specialized offered to buy Ritchey out, which would have given him the lifestyle he wanted. But in the end, Tom was only interested in saving his company. In an article from the San Francisco Chronicle, Tom Ritchey was quoted as saying, quote, "There are real downsides to somebody taking over your name and your history. I'm not saying that it doesn't work out for people, but I know that I would not do well with that decision." That same article said that it took nearly 4 years to unwind the deal. Ritchey Design wasn't back until 2000, but that was just in time for the dot-com bust. In the midst of this came a devastating event for Tom as well. After 25 years of marriage, Ritchey's wife, Katie, left him. There's so much here, and it could be another 6-hour podcast, but it's so well documented already. The place that you can read about how Tom got through this horrible period of his life is in the book Land of Second Chances, where he went to Rwanda, which I'll put in the show notes.
Not only survive it, but come back and thrive. And, it's the resolve to learn something and to make sure that you don't make the mistake again. And be in a position with people that are also on your team saying, yes, I agree with you. I want that. And when they're on your team, whether it be your family, your wife, your employees, and they're all for you being who you are in an authentic way and not being, taken down a different road that you don't want, is not right, is just a reactionary thing. And you have their support to do it, and you're that way, and you're built that way, and you just say, yeah, I don't need to be big. I just need to be a small company that makes a difference, makes a lot of people happy, and that is uniquely independent. So I guess what it finally comes down to is what I was going to say to you. My philosophy of product development is that it's not about the components. It's about the product development as me as a person. I'm product development because I'm the one that has to get it. I have to figure it out. And I'm given all this opportunity, and I'm a failed product if I don't figure it out.
Does that weigh on you? Is it lonely not having, say, a business partner or being the brave face, or is it just a responsibility that drives you, or how do you see that?
I just think that it's a benevolent dictatorship, and that's just the way it's meant to be. And that's what's on the shoulder of a good benevolent dictator. So you have to have a very high commitment to moral ethicity and people doing the right thing for people and making sure that you're not you're not being hypocritical, and you can be trusted. I'd say, the highest thing in product development, whether it be a part or a person, is, are you able to trust it? And I'd like to hope that, people will weigh my product design and the components that have my name on it and say, I can trust that. And also me as a person that's behind them, that they can say they can trust me.
Yeah.
Integrity is a very interesting word for me, because if you break down the word integrity, it basically is a product development term. Integrous, the sum of the parts, they hold together, they're trustworthy. It's an all-encompassing term that if you strive for that, if you want to be understood by others, you do things that are understandable and are trustworthy. It's the kind of person that I want to be. I want to be understood as a trustworthy person, because I want to be able to walk out that door and see my fellow man and be able to smile at him and not hide from him. And I want that about, and so I bear the burden of a lot of components that have my name on it. They're in the marketplace. And every one of them is from this head. Every one of them is worked out, the design, the purpose of the product, and the instinct that it's going to pass fatigue testing on me and my equipment and myself personally before it goes into a consumer's hands. And that's a lot of, the shoulder weight of thinking about all the people over 50 years that have a Ritchey product, a bike that is still riding, a 50-year-old road bike that I built that is riding a brand new Outback or Road Logic that I just, designed and is built with my tubing and all the things that I put into it, and all is no different.
I was just going to say, there's no separation between you, yourself, and the brand, right? And brand is another word for reputation, and there's no arm's length there. It is you that's printed on their product that they're enjoying and counting on. That is a big responsibility. That
is the only thing that makes me worry at night. Is that, to me, I've made something that will fail, and that drives me. That gives me a peace at night, a sleep, or it gives me a night I'm thinking about something that I may have done wrong. I may have made a mistake in. Everyone makes mistakes. It's not possible to be perfect, but I definitely strive for a company that has integrity in the full process of doing business with Ritchey, of building designs that work for people, that give them the best possible enjoyment in their riding experience, and that doesn't let them down, and that gives them, a bike is an amazing gift. It's a gift to me, and it should be a gift that I pass forward with the intent that my products have that purpose built into them.
I'm Wade Wallace, and thanks for listening to another episode of Overnight Success. If you have suggestions on a remarkable entrepreneurial story within the cycling industry, hit me up on our members Discord channel where I'd love to hear about it. Until next time, stay inspired and stay tuned for our next episode.